We like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
So, welcome to the Supernatural Hour podcast. I'm your host, Raven.
I'm Rogue.
This is Doc.
And Chad's here.
Today we're going to talk about dragons. And I'm actually super excited to talk about dragons.
Yeah, you look prepared. You got a stack of notes there.
I have 6 pages of notes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're really dragging this thing up.
Yes, we are.
Oh, jeez.
Dragons, from, again, those 10 websites, I think are by far the most mythical creature. You ask someone, what's a mythical creature? I think the likelihood of someone saying dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Very first.
Unicorn, dragon, mermaid.
Right.
Maybe those 3.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think, you're going to start getting things like hippogriffs and manticores and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think dragon's going to be one of your top
Two,
two.
because they're on the flags of British Isle countries.
Exactly.
Dragons and unicorns.
Well, the thing I find interesting
And
about...
everywhere else in
Right.
the world,
Yeah,
for that matter.
I was just going to say, the thing about dragons is it's everywhere. Every culture has them. The Americas, Europe, India, China, everybody has dragons. And so that makes you go,
That might mean something.
why does everybody have dragons?
And they're not even like going back to a medieval invention or a medieval. They go clear back to the beginnings of Samaria and Babylon and all the way back. Some of the very earliest things are dragons and
Right.
serpents and dragons.
Yeah, from what I could tell, they couldn't really say it started here. But like you said, the Greeks and the Sumerians is as far back as it goes. And I would almost wonder China. China goes back really
They
far.
go back way back.
Way back.
So I would dare throw China in there.
Now, I did see one thing that was quite interesting is with like the cave paintings and things like that, dragons aren't included in cave paintings, in any of the cave paintings of
Right.
primitive man, that it hadn't evolved into a dragon lore there where you'll see, eagles and snakes and, rhinoceroses and elephants and different things in the different caves, buffalo, those kinds of things. But dragons are not found in cave paintings from prehistoric man.
Right, and you can surmise that as you will. Is it because the dragons died out before cave paintings? Did cave paintings come after dragon lore?
Right. One of the theories that I came across was that some of these cultures discovered dinosaur bones and weren't quite sure what they were. They just noticed that they're these giant lizard things with teeth. And I don't know that primitive man doing cave paintings were doing much mining or anything like that where they would have encountered fossilized bones, right? It would have been a little later with more advanced civilizations when they're looking for ore and that kind of stuff that they would have come across these.
Right, and the word the word dinosaur didn't even come about until like 1921 or
Right.
something like that.
Much more modern term for sure.
The modern dinosaur is a very modern term.
However, fossils have been found going quite a ways back. And like you say, people may have found like Triceratops skulls and things like
Right.
that. And the only way they could explain those would be dragons.
Some giant lizard monster.
Something
Go
I
figure.
found interesting was dragons, it ran the gamut. Sometimes they were useful and protective, sometimes they were harmful and dangerous. But when Christianity really started to blossom, they were the ones that took on or assigned dragons, a sinister role, as being evil, and it came to represent Satan. And in medieval times, most of the people knew them from the Bible. And it said that at the time, in medieval time, that a lot of Christians probably believed in literal, actual dragons. And this could go, I think that my personal opinion is that dragons were dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And people can argue with me. People can think I'm crazy. But if you read about Leviathan that they talk about in the book of Jacob, chapter 41, sounds like a dragon. Listen to this. And I shall quote. Its back has rows of shields, tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth, sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. Now that doesn't sound like the King James version of Job to me. I don't know what version this is,
New
but
World Translation or something.
probably it doesn't say which version of the Bible it comes from. But that sounds like a dragon to me.
Sounds a lot like a dragon. Absolutely.
And another biblical reference was the behemoth, which has been ascribed as a dragon also. And there's, more about Leviathan is in Revelations too.
Right. Even in Revelation, they talk about the pit to hell is basically the mouth of a dragon as well.
Right. I delved a little deeper into the religious aspect for just a minute. In Genesis, it tells us that on day 5 of creation, God created great sea creatures, and the Hebrews used the word tananim. And so this particular person that wrote this decided that this would have included swimming plesiosaurs, the flying pterodactyls, which we might have called dragons, if you're kind of on board with me, of dragons being dinosaurs. It says God made land animals, including dinosaurs and other land dragons, on day 6, the day he created man. So this line of thinking has man and dinosaurs and dragons being created at the same time. And so men living with dragons, which would lend to believe how it got spread over the whole earth. If you're living with them, you're telling stories about them, you're passing those stories down to your children, and then it gets crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism with dragons in general, and a lot of that ties back to these Christian references. When we think of dragons, we just think of this raw, natural power, right? A destroying power. And when you start looking back symbolically, there's always man being at war with dragons. If you look at there's a painting or a famous picture of St. George, who's over the top of the dragon, taming or slaying the dragon. One of the things that you'll see pretty consistently is that dragons represent the dark aspect of feminine nature. And so when you look at, for example, women play a role as creator, but you can also see them in the role as destroyer. And so there's kind of this two sides to the feminine aspect. The natural aspect, the ability to create life, those kinds of things, that is the power of creation, but they also have the destroying power. So you kind of see those two things together. This plays out a lot throughout fairy tales, and it plays out a lot throughout like biblical references too, that the dragon is kind of our natural inclination, that natural raw power to be dangerous, to destroy, etc.
Right, that goes back to the word tannin, where in Hebrew it says the Hebrew word tannin is defined by the enhanced Brown, Driver, Briggs, Hebrew, and English lexicon, that's a mouthful, as serpent, dragon, sea monster. It says it probably likely refers to certain reptiles, including giant marine creatures, but it can be translated and denoting a dragon, which can potentially refer to dinosaurs, but most likely it means serpent, which is often ascribed to Satan and the dark forces.
Well, when I'm referring feminine energies, for example, you see this in fairy tales. If you go back to the story of Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent, what does she turn into? She's fighting Prince Philip. A dragon. If you look at Game of Thrones and you have Daenerys, who starts out as kind of that like positive, gentle, timid, feminine nature, and it develops into this powerful, raw, physical nature.
Destroyer.
She becomes the mother of dragons. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, it's that nature that she eventually gives into that destroys her as well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
She ends up caving to that power, that raw, natural power. And it's interesting to see these references, because generally where women or the feminine nature is kind of perceived that way as being either, positive, creative, gentle and loving or negative, destructive, and dark.
That would be me today.
Yeah, Karens, by the way. You want to talk about dragons, we got Karens. Usually the masculine energies, which are, more geared towards enlightenment and adventure and pursuit, are the ones that usually come in and are involved in taming the dragon in all of these stories. Sleeping Beauty, for example, is a really good example. It's an incredible archetypal symbol that I don't think people get. The whole story of Sleeping Beauty is about parents that are being overprotective of their daughter. They refuse to let her see the bad things in the world, right? So that's why Maleficent wasn't invited to her christening.
Because
right?
it was one of the bad things in the world.
Right, because Maleficent was dark and bad, and so the parents were trying to shield her from the dark forces of the world so she would know nothing about them. In return, when she becomes old enough to become adult age, to have to deal with adult problems, she has no exposure to these things, and she essentially becomes sleepy. She falls asleep and is like...
Well, she can't handle it, so
she can't,
checks out.
And that's the curse that Maleficent put on her, right? Was essentially she's cursed to have basically ignorance to this whole idea that there's badness in the world. And it's Prince Philip who represents the enlightenment, right? That has to come and awaken Sleeping Beauty, that the mind to the realities of the world. And it's that pushes the pursuit into the dark, that leads to overcoming the dragon and leads to, I'm trying to think of the right term for this, growth and advancement. And so, you see that play out in Sleeping Beauty from start to finish. And the whole moral of the story is you need to teach your kids to deal with hard things, because if you don't, there's going to be problems.
They're going to shut down and...
Yeah, they won't be able to function. They won't be functional adults. And so, kind of an odd thing, but the dragon there represents the dark aspects of nature, of reality, of the things we have to deal with that we don't want to sometimes.
So I actually ran across something similar-ish. It says the word dragon came from the ancient Greek dracoda, which means to watch, suggesting that he's guarding something. And you think about it in The Hobbit, the dragon is guarding his stuff. But they're so powerful. Well, and even Harry Potter. They put the dragon inside Gringotts, right, to protect. But they're so powerful. Why would they need to protect these coins and gems? They're not going to need money, right? What do they need to pay for? Dragon's going to come walking up and hand you a few coins and say, hey, I'd like that. No, they're just going to fry your face off, right, and take it. Why do they need to do that? So it's probably more of a symbolic treasure, not hoarding for the dragon, but a reward for the brave knights that go and slay the dragon.
Right.
A reward for slaying evil, slaying that serpent, slaying Satan.
That's absolutely right. It is that willingness to put yourself at risk, to do things you haven't done, to attempt things that are big and scary, that lead to you, in the end, finding the treasure or being able to get the treasure. You have to go through the dragon. Right. That is a life lesson as well.
Yeah, and if you think of all the mythical creatures out there, dragons are one of the few. I mean, maybe a manicore and the names of the other ones are escaping me. But dragons are one of the few, and I think if you were to put a hierarchy, you're going to put dragon at the top of, because they can fly and breathe fire, and
they're powerful.
But a lot of these mythical creatures, like trolls, elves, fairies, I mean, they will interact with humans, but you're not usually trying to vanquish the fairy.
Right. That was a big lightning crash.
Yeah,
there.
we have a flash flood warning today, so that was a little kaboom-a-boom.
That was intense. But right, and for the most part, when it comes to dragons, most of the time it's an individual that goes to slay the dragon, right? It's not necessarily like, oh, happenstance, I ran into a dragon. It's usually some type of planned event where, there's that pursuit where you prepare and you take on a really big challenge and you get the reward at the end.
Right.
And it's usually an individual situation. It's not like we sent the armies out against the dragon. And sometimes they will, unsuccessfully.
Well, I mean...
But it takes an individual to actually pull it off in most of the mythology.
Like even in Shrek, it was Donkey.
That's right.
That tamed the dragon all by his onesie.
Also feminine, by the way. the dragon?
So we talked about it a little bit earlier, but one of the most chronicled that we hear about is St. George, the dragon slayer. And what does he do? He comes upon a town. The town's threatened by a dragon. He rescues the fair maiden. He protects himself with the sign of the cross because, the dragon's representing Satan. He slays the dragon, gets the princess. They live happily ever after.
Right. And symbolically there, too, you can talk about if the dragon represents nature, St. George represents culture. And this battle between St. George and the dragon is basically culture versus nature, spirit versus physical, however you want to view it that way. It's about being able to overcome our nature with things like culture. And, by overcoming, it's not necessarily about slaying. People use the term slaying the dragon a lot. A lot of it's about taming the dragon, because every one of us, we have a dragon inside of each and every one of us, whether you want to call it, your shadow person or whatever. We all have, your demon, whatever you want to call it. We all have that same potential. So when we were talking about dragons representing that raw, natural power, that destructive power, we all have power to destroy, right? And by slaying the dragon or by taming the dragon, that's what gives us power as well, because we're able to overcome our natural state. We're able to overcome our carnal wants in pursuit of more virtuous things, I suppose. But at the same time, you still have that potential to be dangerous, and that's what makes you effective.
Right. And the thing I think is interesting about that is the descriptions of dragons vary so dramatically. You can cater it to whatever works for you. I mean, some have wings, some don't. Some can talk, some can breathe fire. Some are huge, some are little, some live in the ocean, some live in the volcano. I mean, there's such a variety.
Right, depending on what aspect you're trying to convey, they'll focus on things like the ones that breathe fire. A lot of times people will see that symbolically as passions, right? Fire-breathing
So
dragon.
when I was looking into all of this, though, there's 5 videos that I ran across on the infamous YouTube
Oh, yes.
of actual dragons. Videos of like one's slithering just in a cave. I don't know, maybe 16 inches. To ones that are flying away that are landing on a lamppost. So as you're talking about dragons, you're putting them in a theory of it being us,
Mythical.
or
The symbology of it, yes.
right.
Mhm.
But in some people out there
Believe
are
in a
believing that there's a
literal
physical
dragon.
right. So did you come across any of those videos? What do you think about some of that? Because, the one that's in the cave of the little slithering thing that's like 18 inches, I don't know what that thing is.
I guess-
it had little arms and legs and...
Right, I guess it depends on what you're going to define as a dragon, right? We
Right.
have Komodo dragons.
Right, and then that's
bearded
the
dragons.
other thing is we do have
Dragons, if that's how we want to
with
define
air
it.
quotes.
Right, I guess it depends on a matter of definition.
Well, it's interesting. People say, fire-breathing dragons, nothing breathes fire. That's garbage. But it's interesting. There's certain beetles that shoot out a burning chemical. And whether that's an actual visual, they light up, or if it's, just
A hot poison,
a
a hot
hot,
acid.
it burns when it touches you.
Right.
Things as lore gets exaggerated, and if you're a big tough guy and a beetle comes up and spits on you and it hurts, you're not going to say, "Oh, little beetle spit on me." No, it's going to be a dragon that spit fire.
The story's getting embellished.
Right?
This giant beetle.
So something I think is interesting on that, along the same lines of fire breathing, those elements come from a lot of medieval depictions of dragons. There's an art by a Dutch painter named, I'm gonna butcher this, Hieronymus Bosch. Hieronymus Bosch. That's what I'm going with. It's my story. I'm sticking to it. And a lot of times these dragons depict hell, and the way he draws these, the entrance to hell is depicted in the monster's actual mouth, with the flames and the smoke, being the characteristics of Hades belching out from the bowels of this dragon.
These aren't sound effects, by the way.
This is real thunder.
Maybe it's dragons.
It could be.
It could be. Just because that would be weird.
That would be Chinese culture with the dragons bringing in the rain.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a big focus with water from what I was reading as well, and kind of the Chinese dragon myths as well. They're not viewed in quite the same negative ways you see in a lot of the Western world or in, the Christian view.
Yeah, there's two different real cultural trains of thought there, with the Chinese and the Eastern dragons more representing wisdom, luck, positive attributes. They were the emperors associated themselves with the dragons as a positive thing because the people believed that to be, wisdom and all of the good qualities. You hear about the Year of the Dragon and the different things in the Chinese calendar, but Chinese culture and East Asian culture with dragons is a lot different than the Western culture with the slaying of the dragon and the dragon representing evil.
Yeah. And if you were to say to me, what are the top 3 cultures of dragons that you think of? I personally would say China, Wales.
Yeah, Western Europe. Yeah, exactly.
With the castles and jousters. And then Aztecs.
South America. Or Central America. Yeah,
with their dragons.
Yes, I was about to say Aztecs
Feathered
all the way
serpents.
down, right? Because if you look at the Maya in Mexico and then down into Guatemala and even further south, so you get more of that Central America.
Yeah, absolutely cross-cultural, with diverse groups of people that had no contact with, may have little different representations.
And it's
of
not
the
like they
dragons.
were hopping on airplanes, talking about it with each other. I mean, they came up with these all on their own.
Right. Well, and, we were talking about with, Eastern or Chinese culture, they had a very positive view of dragons. And then if you look at Aztec and Maya culture, same idea, right? These are symbols of wisdom. These are their gods, essentially.
Right. And even, I go to a lot of bagpipe competitions, right? I'm a bagpipe player. And you don't see this very often, but every once in a while, there's somebody that dresses up in a red dragon costume.
Who's Welsh?
To represent Wales, and they walk around in this red dragon costume.
At the Scottish festival.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes.
So do you
yes,
know
they
the
do.
story
Play
behind the red dragon?
bagpipes?
He doesn't play bagpipes. He just wanders around in
I
a
see.
dragon costume.
Just Wales represented at the Scottish festival, that's all.
Yeah.
Do you know the story behind the red dragon?
No. I think I've heard it, but I don't remember it.
Do tell.
It's a Merlin story. And Merlin was working with a king, and they didn't say the name on it. I don't know if it was Arthur Pendragon or which, but he was working with the king, and they were trying to build a castle, and the foundations of the castle, as they're building it, kept going apart, and Merlin was called in to try to determine what was going on, and he determined that there was a lake under the castle, and there were 2 dragons there. There was a red dragon and a white dragon. And the red dragon has become to represent Wales and the Welsh people. The white dragon represented the Anglo-Saxons, or what became the English. And they were in a constant battle. And at the beginning, the white dragon became predominant over the red dragon. But they said that would only last for a while. And the myth and the story is that the red dragon will prevail eventually, and that's why they have the red dragon on the Welsh flag.
Okay, I'm going to go off the subject here for just a second. So the Welsh, their national animal is the dragon.
Uh-huh.
And the Scottish national animal is a unicorn.
Oh.
Just
And they're
throwing
both
that out
represented on the Scottish coat of arms. I don't know if it's on the Scottish flag, but the
Is
unicorn
it the Queen's flag? I think it's the Queen's flag.
Maybe it is.
I don't know. I didn't research flag.
But I've seen the image of that, and I don't know if it was the Queen's flag. It's not the Scottish, because the Scottish flag is the blue with the white cross X, right?
Right. They don't have their unicorn symbol on their flag,
on their
but
national flag.
it's their national animal.
That's interesting. Since we were just talking about, unicorns and dragons are probably your
Right. Well, it's
two best known
there's
mythical
a joke
creatures.
where England, because England's is the rampant lion, right? And they're like, okay, you pick one. And Wales says, I'll pick a dragon. It's not real. And then Scotland says, unicorn. And England is like, oh, guys.
Come on.
And England goes, we'll pick a lion. And they go, there haven't been any here for 2,000 years.
Yeah, it's a funny joke. Okay, back to actual dragons.
I was going to add with the the focus with Central America and that when I went down to Chichen Itza in Mexico, one of the things they mentioned is as the conquistadors were coming through and they saw these temples that were dedicated to serpents, their first thought was, oh, these are evil, these are satanic.
Devil worship.
This is devil worship. And so they basically enslaved the natives, forced them to dismantle their temples and build cathedrals in their stead. And one of the big driving factors to that was the fact that they did have all these carvings of serpents. And, when we were just talking about that Christian view of dragons or serpents, the conquistadors instantly associated it with something nefarious or something evil. So they forced them to dismantle their temples for that reason.
Yeah, and for a while, people used the dragon as neither good nor bad, but as a rally call, for armies. And they had they used them as decorations. They had, they possessed protective and terror-inspiring qualities. Who wants to be the mosquitoes? You want to be the mighty dragons, right? And so they were used as warlike emblems. So in the story of King Agamemnon from the Iliad, on his shield he had a blue three-headed snake. And you go, well, it's a snake. Well, we talk about the snake being the serpent, the dragons being the serpent, and then the Norse warriors would paint dragons on their shields and dragon heads on their
ships,
on
their Viking ships.
Right. This kind of goes back to that idea of taming the dragon or slaying the dragon. It still has to be present, right? If you eliminate your potential to cause harm as an army, you're not very threatening. But when you can control the dragon and you know when to unleash the dragon, you become a very dangerous thing because you can take your raw power and you can apply it with focus and discipline. And you become a much more formidable foe when people know this guy's going to unleash the dragon on me. Holy crap.
And in addition to that, there's the psychological warfare
Right.
aspect of that, of not even the doing of that. I mean, it got to the point with the Vikings that they'd pull into port and people would just bring the money down and say,
Right.
"Hey, here you go.
Not worth my time."
Yeah, don't
gonna fight
don't
that.
kill us. Here's the money. See you in a year."
Right. But they adopt that symbol because it's like, hey, I control my dragon and I can unleash my dragon when I choose. And people respect that because guess what? If they didn't have that dark side to them,
They wouldn't give them the money.
they wouldn't get the money, they wouldn't win the war, they wouldn't have the respect, right? So you have to learn to tame your dragon.
Control your dragon.
I kind of wanted How to Train Your Dragon.
You learn how to train your dragon, guys. Come on. What happened after that? Nobody's going to screw with you when you got dragons. Come on.
Oh. So kind of interesting going back to, the dragons being the feminine. A little tidbit that I found was in the Chinese dragon lore, Lung, which represents the yang or the principle of heaven, and the maleness in the yin yang of Chinese cosmology is actually the dragon, and it's the one that was on their flag until 1911.
That makes a lot of sense to me when we were speaking about Eastern cultures having more of the alignment with royalty and those symbols of good fortune and luck and all that, is that they may associate dragons with masculine energy instead of the natural energies or the darker energies. That's interesting.
And then an interesting thing I found out, it said both Chinese and Japanese dragons, even though they are regarded as powers of the air, are usually depicted wingless. You're not going to see wings as much on a Chinese or Japanese dragon, if at all. Again, I'm not a
Dragonologist?
not a dragonologist.
But you're right. They tend to be more slender, at least from what I've seen in the depictions.
The serpent-like with claws and legs, but not so much wings.
Right. Where I think...
Except for in Mulan, where they put those little itty-bitty wings on it.
On Mushu?
You
Mushu?
watch so many movies. Every single movie you've referenced today,
You have no idea.
I have not watched. No, but I trust you all that you're telling me the truth.
Well, awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little... I wrote this down because it's interesting. Sometimes people get really out there. So what happened to the dragons? If you're like me and you think that dragons was just how you explained dinosaurs, then they died. I think they died in Noah's flood. People believe they were killed by stuff in the... What's the word I want?
I'm going with
Meteors?
asteroid. We're going with a
Okay.
meteor for me.
I go for floods, but that's what I think. But
That asteroid made a big flood.
I'm sure it did. That ripple effect was pretty intense.
yeah, we're not here to argue theology. But it says there's one fellow who had a theory that land and air dragons would have been taken on Noah's Ark and probably existed for some time afterwards, based on the descriptions we see in the Bible and artifacts and legends worldwide. But they died out due to the curse of sin.
Rogue's face right now is priceless. I'm like, what?
Sin. I don't think dragons were on the ark. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah, me either.
And people say, well, how did they get the stories? Well, Noah.
Land dragons. What were those little dragons we were talking about earlier today?
The
No.
Komodo dragons.
Yeah, maybe it was a couple of those.
That's right.
Could be. Could
Bearded
be.
dragons.
But
There
this
you
fellow decided that they died out due to the curse of sin.
Did they...
Because they were carrying the sins of others?
I don't know. I didn't write
I
this.
was about
I'm
to say,
just-
how did that
just
work?
reading it.
They were just like sinful. They're like, sorry, dragons. You're done here.
You're no good. You're out of here.
Curse of sin. You're done.
Yeah. So just sin.
So I wanted to touch just a little bit on that. Most civilizations have a dragon culture. We've kind of talked on that a little bit, but some of the popular stories along those with the cultures is, we talked about Zeus. There's a dragon story related to Zeus and him winning beating the dragon with the use of his thunderbolts. Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleece, and there with the Greeks. You've got Beowulf with the Norse, and the fighting of the dragon there, where he was killed by the dragon, and Sigurd again with the Norse. That we've got lots of dragon stories that are still very popular in culture, in our cultures across the across the world in different places.
And they're almost always an individual, like you said, that goes in pursuit to fight the dragon, right? And most of the time male.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, just symbolically, it's an idea of culture versus nature.
Yeah, and it wasn't until the early 1900s that dragons started becoming child literature, child-friendly, being there, and you think, a little bit
Like
about that.
Pete's Dragon.
Like Pete's Dragon, Puff
Have you
the
seen that
Magic
one,
Dragon.
Rogue? Have you seen Pete's
There's
Dragon?
Another movie, Pete's Dragon.
I think maybe when I was younger.
Puff the Magic Dragon. Don't make me sing the song. I promised I wouldn't
I can.
sing.
I don't sing. Don't sing. Don't do it. She's doing it.
But yeah, and then there was a book, and I didn't write down the thing, but one of the very first ones that came out in like 1919 or 1910 about the dragon, and it was a little boy about and the dragon and St. George, and the little boy, explained to St. George that the dragon wasn't really bad. This dragon liked poetry and was a good dragon and was nice. And St. George actually, they worked it out with the dragon, and the dragon faked his own death because the townspeople wanted the dragon killed.
Of course, because
he's
they
an
were
evil
demanding
dragon.
human sacrifice. I mean, I'd probably want that thing eliminated as well.
No, this was a friendly dragon. But anyways, interesting, because that was the beginning of more of that, where dragons become things where, do any of your kids have dragon plushes where they have a dragon? Dragons have become very...
Yes. We have a giant dragon plushie, and the ownership of this plushie is
debated.
often debated.
It's almost like that mentality of, taming your dragon or controlling your dragon is kind of shifted there, where it's like not about utter destruction.
And again, the
about-
movie How to Train Your Dragon, Again, the dragons have moved from that sinister,
Right, they're causing a
evil
problem for you.
to now being
Right, it's the same thing about our natural desires and our natural potential, right? If you succumb to it, you are going to make bad decisions. It's going to be damaging. They're going to be damaging to you, So that dragon is going to be harmful to you until you learn to control it. In which case, you become empowered. You become stronger. That's interesting.
I want to throw out just another little thing we've kind of talked about. Dragons being serpents and dragons being Satan and dragons being dinosaurs. There is a thought process out there that dragons are elephants or hippopotamus. I guess in some translations of the Bible, in the footnotes of Job 40, is listed elephant or hippopotamus when it says dragon. But it says, let's look at behemoth, right? And talk about behemoth. And it describes behemoth as eats grass like an ox and moves his tail like a cedar with bones that are like beams of bronze. And so some people say that describes an elephant, a hippopotamus, or even a brachiosaurus. So we
That's
just
a big jump from those two to the third, though.
Yeah. I don't know, brachiosaurus could just be a really big giraffe elephant. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Work with me here.
It's really interesting.
I can't support that theory, so
I can't either. Well, I can accept the brachiosaurus theory, but not the elephant hippopotamus theory.
I read once, not in the last, preparing for this podcast, and it could have been on the History Channel. I really don't know where this source came from, but it came to mind today when I was thinking about this, that way back in the day, that a comet was going through the sky, and the Greeks seen this comet, and they were the first to call that comet a dragon because of the fire and the flames shooting through the sky.
See, that's definitely a good theory too.
Right?
It flies, it breathes fire.
Exactly.
There you go.
Has a tail.
So,
It's got a
Chad,
tail.
you had a little blurb about gargoyles and dragons.
Yeah, and so did Rogue. Do you want to cover that, Rogue?
No, go ahead.
Okay, there's one of the dragons, and this is in Europe. There was a community that was building a church, and in this area there had been a dragon that was giving them problems, and it was called Gargle. The dragon was named Gargle that they did, and I don't believe it was St. George, but it was a saint, someone that had come through a night, came through and actually defeated the dragon and killed the dragon. And so when they built the church, they used the gargle dragon for the downspouts of the water, and that's where the gargoyles come from. That's where the idea of the gargoyles on the medieval churches evolved, was from this tale of the dragon being slayed and then being represented on the church.
And gargoyles now, they use them as a protector to ward off.
Right, I was just going to say that.
Evil.
We were at the Rollins Museum last summer. We took a trip out to South Dakota, and we stopped at the Rollins Museum in Wyoming on the way. And in one of the back rooms, now several years ago, our whole group, just as a group, went out and investigated there. And I didn't notice this there at that time, but we noticed it just taking the regular Joe Blow tour. And was it the cafeteria?
Mm-hmm.
They actually had a gargoyle there and I asked the gal about it because I knew that it was there to ward off evil spirits. But I'm just like, hey, what's up with the gargoyle?
Right.
I wanted to hear her story. And she said that they had a lot of activity in that room. I'm like, yeah, I know. We investigated. I mean, I don't think we investigated in that room, but I knew there was activity in the building. So.
But they put up a gargoyle.
There's a gargoyle in the Rollins Museum.
There you go. Interesting.
I'm going through my pictures of the Rollins Museum right now.
Looking for the gargoyle.
Just to see if I have a picture of it.
So here's one more, because I like it when Rogue makes that face. It's kind of awesome. It's that, really?
What on
Face.
earth?
Yes. So we talked about what happened to the dragons and, Noah's Ark, and that didn't go over well with Rogue. The person who wrote this, bless their heart, and it's going to be bad if you have to say bless your heart, right? But he said, or she, I don't know who wrote this actually, But it said also man most likely played a role in the demise of dragons, as we read in the legend of dragon slayers.
Oh, it's just all those guys going out and just beating on the dragons.
There it is.
They'd
There's
still
the
be
face.
here if St. George wasn't such a jerk.
Exactly.
Well, honestly, back to that, this idea of chasing out the dragons or slaying the dragons, the story of St. Patrick chasing the serpents out of Ireland is a very similar archetype
similar
when you look
story.
at it. It's this idea of ridding yourself of the bad, evil dragons.
Well, and then this same fellow, he ended his little blurb kind of on that same thing. He says, we have a very real enemy who is called a dragon. And he gives scriptural reference. His trickery led the human race into sin, and he's still deceiving and devouring today.
He's referencing Satan, I presume.
Yep. And he says, you cannot defeat the dragon of your own. You need Jesus. I mean, however it is you are going to defeat your personal
Right.
dragons
but
works for you.
serpents, like I said, they're not always negative. I mean, the Garden of Eden, you've got the serpent there who tempts Eve.
The Tale
right?
of Gilgamesh back in the Sumerian stuff, same thing. There was a serpent.
Right.
But they eat like mice out of your gardens and stuff.
Right, but if you look at other symbols, I mean, even in the Bible, you've got the brazen serpent, which was a positive symbol that he could look upon and not die when
And
you
be
get
saved.
bitten, right?
You know what my favorite snake is?
What's your favorite snake?
In Ohio, they have the mound builders. What are their names? What are they called?
The Hopewell people.
Hopewell people. And there's one called Serpent Mound, and they don't know really why it's there or what it's there. I've got my theories, but it has no place on this podcast. Not a bad theory. It just would be so off
This
the
gets back to
subject.
the ancient American,
Right, but it's just to really see it, you have to kind of climb up in this little tower that they've got. Tower's a weird word.
No, it's a tower. It's got to be 40 feet tall.
Platform.
Platform's a good
But
word.
you just climb up this ladder on this platform and you can see it, and it's just this wiggly little snake, and he's eating an egg, and there's all sorts of theories of what it is and why it is, and I've been there.
Yeah, getting
It's
back
pretty
to
cool.
serpents too, which is kind of interesting. Part of the reason that some people, have a hypothesis of the dragons and the snakes is that early primates have they developed a lot of their motor functions to be able to identify snakes, to protect themselves from snakes, because snakes were one of the very, very earliest predators along the timeline.
Right, threats to mankind, right?
Yeah, and we're even talking back even before mankind, like, just right after the dinosaurs with the little furry ancestors with evolution that evolved into mankind. But the idea of that they build into that. And our people have a fear of snakes. That's one of the primary phobias almost everybody has.
Right.
Is a fear of snakes. Even if you like snakes, a lot of people will shudder a little bit when they hold them and handle them, even when they're their pets. And this goes back to it's an action that your brain clicks into and recognizes that threat even before you think about it. It's like blinking when something's coming at your
Right.
eye. It's automatic.
It's a reflex, essentially.
Yeah. And that's one of the standard things that most people have. And it gets really interesting because when you look at this, in Madagascar, there are no snakes. And lemurs, while all of the other primates have these kinds of reactions with snakes, lemurs don't.
Right.
Because there was no evolutionary reason for them to fear snakes.
Right.
And they didn't develop the eyesight acuity of other primates because of that. So
I
it's
love
really
where this
interesting.
is going. So if you go back to the story of the Garden of Eden,
Okay.
back to your point about not having the eyesight to acknowledge, to
be able to
recognize,
see?
it's the serpent who opens the eyes of mankind, right? To help them see the difference between good and evil, or good and bad. And, from a deep, way back reference, the idea is there that primitive man learned to see and understand and acknowledge good and bad through that exact same development, that reflex.
So I thought that was a really interesting thing where they talked about it. And the other one is the idea of the dragon and what it is, because the three primary predators of early man would have been snakes, raptors, And when I say raptors, birds, eagles,
Right.
raptors, and carnivores like lions and tigers.
Right.
And
And
bears.
bears, oh my.
Oh, my.
And what would a dragon be?
Hey, let's see. A lot of those look like flying snakes with wings and claws. And
That can-
some of them sometimes have bodies like lions. and it's an amalgamation of these.
Of our fears,
Yeah.
of these threats. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's pervasive in all cultures because it's a pervasive thing for everybody.
Because those are the things we're freaking scared of.
I'm scared of spiders.
Yeah, we didn't get that one in there. We probably were eating spiders back then. We didn't care.
That was probably lunch.
Yum.
So gross.
Way to put that all together.
We're not scared of spiders.
No.
All right, I think we're going to end on that note. Ugh.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright 2021 by Advanced Paranormal Services.